All right, today we're going to break down a major presidential address given at the United Nations. But we're not just going to skim the policy points. What we're really doing is pulling back the curtain on the story being told, a powerful classic narrative of decline and restoration. And we're going to see exactly how that story was built piece by piece.
So, right out of the gate, the speech hits you with this line. Now, that's not just a random opening remark. It's the beginning of a story. By talking about a prosperous and peaceful past, the speaker immediately creates a starting point, a kind of golden age that was lost, and sets up the promise to bring it all back.
And here's the roadmap for how that story unfolds. The whole speech is basically built on these 5 pillars. You start by laying out the problem, a world in crisis. Then you move to the solution, America's economic comeback and a new strength on the world stage. And finally, you wrap it all up with a big, bold vision for the future.
Right, so first things first. Every good comeback story needs a villain, or at least a major crisis. So the speech kicks off by painting a really vivid picture of just how bad things had supposedly gotten.
The strategy here is a classic before and after picture. The before is framed as this amazing time of peace and prosperity. But the after, the recent past, that's described as a time of war, crisis, and disasters both at home and around the world. This stark contrast isn't just talk, it's the very foundation that the entire comeback narrative is built on.
Okay, so once the problem is on the table, the narrative pivots to the solution, and the first chapter in this comeback story is all about fixing things at home, starting with the U.S. economy.
To really drive home this idea of an economic revival, the speech presents this incredibly dramatic comparison. The claim is that the previous administration saw less than $1 trillion in new investment over 4 whole years. But the current one, over $17 trillion in just 8 months. The scale of that difference is just huge, and it's designed to signal a massive, almost unbelievable turnaround.
The comeback story is also peppered with very specific data points, and a big one is the stock market. The speaker claims it hit a new record high 48 different times in a very short period. That's a simple, powerful number that's meant to be a clear sign of booming growth and confidence.
Of course, the stock market can feel a little abstract, so a huge part of this story is the claim that inflation has been defeated. And the proof offered is lower prices for everyday things that people really notice, like gas, groceries, and mortgage rates. The idea is to make this economic recovery feel real and personal.
The other pillar of this domestic restoration is the border. And for this, the speech uses a number that's about as stark as it gets: 0. The claim is 0 illegal entries for 4 months in a row, framing the situation as a complete and total reversal of what was called a colossal invasion.
So, with the home front supposedly locked down, the story shifts its focus. We're moving to the world stage. This is Act 2 of the restoration, and it's all about foreign policy, ending conflicts and reestablishing American strength.
And the speech makes a truly sweeping claim here. It lays out a list of 7 different conflicts, describing them as unendable, and asserts that they were all resolved in just 7 months. By listing them out like this, the message is pretty clear. This isn't just normal diplomacy, it's an unprecedented achievement, something nobody thought was possible.
Beyond just ending wars, the narrative is also about strengthening alliances on new terms. A key point here is the claim that NATO allies were successfully pushed to more than double their defense spending, going from 2% all the way up to 5% of their GDP. This, the speaker argues, makes the alliance far stronger.
Now, after laying out all these claimed successes, the speech takes a really fascinating and pretty bold turn. It pivots from talking about achievements to directly criticizing the very institution where the speech is being given, framing the UN itself as part of the problem.
And this little story is used to perfectly illustrate that critique. The speaker tells a personal anecdote about bidding to renovate the UN building. As you can see, the contrast is sharp. A proposed $500 million project with marble floors versus what the UN actually did, a project that cost $2 to $4 billion and ended up with terrazzo floors. It's a simple story meant to paint a very clear picture of bureaucratic waste.
But the critique then gets much more specific and much more pointed. The speech flat out accuses the UN of actively making the border crisis worse, claiming its budget is being used to give cash and transportation to migrants. The accusation is that the UN is basically bankrolling what the speaker calls an invasion. All of that criticism of the UN is really just a setup for the final and most important theme of the whole speech. It moves from specific policies to a grand philosophy for the future,
a world that should be built on national sovereignty, not what the speaker calls globalism.
To make the case against so-called globalist migration policies, the speech points to these numbers from Europe. It highlights the high percentage of foreign nationals in the prison populations of Germany, Greece, and especially Switzerland. This data is used to argue that open borders pose a direct threat to a nation's security.
The exact same anti-globalist argument is then aimed right at climate policy, and it's framed in incredibly stark terms. The speech calls green energy a scam and warns other countries that these kinds of policies will literally destroy their economies. It's a clear attempt to frame global cooperation on climate as a direct threat to national prosperity.
So it's really crucial to understand what the speech means by sovereignty. We're not just talking about independence here. It's defined very specifically as a nation's absolute right to control its own borders, protect its own unique culture, and to flat-out reject any international agendas on issues like migration and climate that it sees as harmful to its own interests. And this is the final vision that the speech leaves us with. It's not a call for global unity or for countries to work together to solve shared problems. Instead, it's a call for a world of proud, separate, independent nations, where the highest ideal is for each country to look inward and focus on protecting its own citizens and heritage first. Which really brings us to the fundamental question at the absolute heart of this entire address, a tension that defines so many debates today. What is a nation for? Is its primary job to be a guardian, protecting its own unique heritage, or is its primary role to be a partner, working with other countries to solve global challenges that affect us all? The answer you land on really shapes the kind of world you see.